So my name is Mike Hartington. I am a developer for Ionic. I work on the framework and I work for the company behind it. And I'm going to be talking about Ionic 2. Everything that kind of encompasses Angular 2, a little bit of ES6, a little bit of TypeScript. It's like JavaScript but with types, so yay. And a little bit more in depth about that. So I actually gave a talk last year about Ionic 1. It was kind of like Ionic's first big year out, doing like a whole bunch of different places, like trying to spread the knowledge. I got to meet what I thought I like to call Ionic's Philly headquarters. We're an international brand. I had an actual Philly cheesesteak. Thank you, Don. I got to give a great talk. A lot of people were very excited about Ionic, especially this guy. He was very excited about Ionic. And it was pretty obvious why. If you've done anything with kind of this hybrid development approach, using web technology and Cordova to build apps, you're pretty familiar with some of the pain points. Ionic kind of alleviates a lot of those points by giving you common components that you can just use in your app and take advantage of without having to do a whole lot of work. So things like side menus, things like tabs, all of this was just created for you, and right out of the box, you had all that functionality for free. And I think probably the most important part about this was it was unapologetically web technology. I think that's a great point to make. It's all just web technology underneath. You're not having to learn any Objective-C because no one really likes the Objective-C syntax. Swift is a little bit better. You're not using Java. I don't like Java personally, but some people may. I like JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. That's where I feel most comfortable, and that's where a lot of people who worked with Ionic felt most comfortable. They were web developers who wanted to actually take part in building apps. And a lot of people built apps. We had a point where we're getting statistics over how many times people are using our CLI tooling. And to date, we have something around over 1 million different apps built. And we have apps that are topping the charts in both Google Play and Apple's iOS App Store. A great app that pointed out in the React Native talk was an app called Sworkit. Over 12 million downloads between iOS and Android. Incredible numbers. It really proves that users don't really care. We're the ones that really care if it's native or web technology or what. Really, users just want an app that works. Sworkit maybe has some issues here and there, but it works and people can get on with their day. And we also saw a lot of adoption, not with the Sworkits, the small startups, the 2 or 3 people who have a side project trying to get stuff going, but we saw a lot of growth in enterprise. A lot of larger banking companies, insurance companies, none of which I can actually name, but a lot of companies that were looking at Ionic and saw that they could take their existing Angular application, maybe use some of the services that they have written, and have their whole team just write a mobile app in a familiar toolset, familiar framework, and not have to hire a whole bunch of iOS devs. Now, this has been the common conception that people have. Hybrid apps are slow. Hybrid apps will never be as performant as a native app. Why would we want to use a JavaScript when we could just compile from JavaScript to native or do some kind of weird inception of the two? Some of that may be true. Maybe there are some performance. Native can handle 3D rendered games really well. It's not to say that it's not impossible to do with JavaScript, maybe in the future. But for the most things, most of the basic, CRUD apps, which are most of the apps in the App Store these days, it's not really much the case. we have a lot of improvements in these little devices now. We have iOS 9, probably the best mobile operating system. Android fans, please don't hate me for that. I think iOS is pretty solid. Never hear of any performance issues on it. The runtime on for the WebKit is very optimized for single core performance. JavaScript thrives there. Android, a little bit of a different story. It's had some rough times before, but it's definitely getting better, especially with Android 5 and 6 being starting to take a majority of the market share. We're seeing probably 75% of Android devices out there are between 4.4, 5, 5.1, and 6. So that's definitely a bit better market share. They have a constantly up-to-date web view, so they're all running Chrome. And we can get the Chrome's amazing performance from the desktop on our mobile device. That gives us a lot of new features that we can take advantage of. So if you think about it, we've all probably, who's heard of ES6 in any way, shape, or form? Who actually writes ES6? Who likes writing ES6? So like it, hate it, ES6 is a step in the right direction for JavaScript, definitely compared to other languages that we have out there. It's kind of like JavaScript's going through puberty right now. It's gonna get some good parts here and there, and and eventually it will grow up to become a mature programming language. More importantly, we have people who are willing to take risks and look into new features that JavaScript could have and are starting to talk about. So anything that we're seeing in, I guess it's not ES7 anymore. I'm just going to call it ES Next. Maybe that'll catch on. Anything that we could see in any future version of JavaScript, or any random guy said, hey, I want to try out this feature and see if I can't get it into the language. We have other runtimes and other tools that we can use to test these features out and compile down to regular ES5 JavaScript that we can run in the browser. So things like async await. We have that in TypeScript. We can have asynchronous functions with TypeScript. We can have static typing, something that totally doesn't belong in JavaScript, but we can use a superset of it with some more features and have that static typing that most developers are familiar with. And I think those key features really make JavaScript development a lot better than it was even a year ago. I said better OSs, but I think there's also another point about that. There's a lot less bad devices. No one's seeing an Android 2.3 device shipped brand new out of the box. We're not seeing Android 4.1 even, or 4.2 or 3. We're really seeing a time where it's like, all right, we're going to get rid of the old Android devices, as they should, and we want people to update. So our devices are better. We have a better language set. We definitely have better APIs with this new language set. And ES6, I love it. So I just thought I'd mention it twice. And then this thing. This is probably the most drastic change. Angular 2 it's coming. It's in its beta phase. But it's a complete rewrite of all of Angular 1. So who's built Angular 1 apps before? Who remembers some of the pain points in trying to figure out, how do I do this the Angular way? It's a complicated thing. We have that magical digest cycle, which somehow keeps everything in loop, and sometimes if data changes outside of it, we have scope.apply or $timeout, which now we have all these watchers to take care of. There's some good reasons for this, and maybe we can take a look at some of those. It's no secret, Angular 1 is actually a rather old framework. If you think about it, Angular 1 came out in 2009. That's forever ago in web technologies and technology in general. We had IE 8 was a thing. We had old Internet Explorer that we had support. We had a lot of Angular-specific syntax and APIs in the framework because that was what we needed. We didn't have classes. We didn't have a way of having a module system. So Angular had to go through and invent a lot of these features. So with that, it's kind of understandable why people would be pretty mad. If you guys didn't hear about NG Europe, it's pretty much a point where everyone thought the Angular team committed framework suicide and just, yeah, we're going to kill off Angular. Everything you know about it is going to be gone, and no more controllers, no more $scope, no more directives even, because the directive definition object is the best part of Angular. This is all the dry sarcasm. Basically, they said we were going to kill everything that makes Angular Angular, and people were kind of like, well, what are we going to have? So now that it's been some time since NG Europe and Angular 2 is kind of matured, we can start to see where this translation pattern is going to be. So if you think about it, we have this pretty mundane example of an Angular module and a controller. You have the Angular.module namespace, and Angular.module method, where we're creating our own module called main controller. It takes 0 dependencies. Then we have a controller called main controller, and it has an anonymous function as its constructor. We're injecting $scope, and then we're just creating some properties. We have $scope, scope.items, and it's just array 1, 2, 3. And then you have scope.add with its function on it, and it's just going to add a new number to that array depending on the length of the array. So Angular.module, Angular's dependency injection, Angular.controller, $scope, and then Angular itself. This is a pretty small example, but we have around five things that are tied directly to Angular itself. None of this could run without Angular, or it just wouldn't even load. So what can we do instead? Well, we can use ES6. Because all the features that Angular had, we can now just rely on the language to take care of most of it. So we have export main class main controller. Boom, there we go. We have our module definition. We have our anonymous function. Our anonymous function becomes now a proper constructor. We have this.items. Again, I can just replace $scope with this.item. That works. And then our scope.item can just become a proper method on our class. So now we have that. And it's pretty easy to see where the translation starts to come from. We can start thinking about this a little bit more with more complicated examples, but the main point is all those Angular-specific features are now just part of the language. I think the most striking part is how this affects templates and directives and all the things that people actually write every day. So this is again, another mundane example, but building off that main controller that we had ng controller. So this is our way to attach the JavaScript and the HTML. And then we have this ng repeat. Just a quick way to just clone the DOM node, update the bindings inside of it for each object in the array. So we're just going to repeat every item in that items array, render out the item, and then have an ng click to call that add method. That's okay. It's not too bad. So we can think of it like this in Angular 2. Now, I'm just going to... I can't even get my mouse. Oh, well. If you guys can't see it, we can move to the forward. We have this at component thing. Now, you may be thinking, is this actual JavaScript? Yeah, it is. It's built on the upcoming feature called decorators. Actually, I'm not sure if he's here, Yehuda Katz. He's actually pushing that forward, and I really like it. I think it's kind of complicated at some points, but for the most part, it really does what you need it to do. We're basically saying we have a component. We're going to look for a target element of hello app. So anytime we have the angle brackets of hello app, we'll just attach this class to that element. And then inside of that hello app tags, we're just going to render out a p tag and a button. Now, that starts to look a little bit like what we had before until you notice that star ng4. Now, that ng4 is essentially saying we're going to create an embedded template, part of Shadow DOM's, the Shadow DOM specification, where we can actually create an element and then custom subcontrols that can only be accessed by that class. So in here, we're just essentially saying we're going to have a template, we're going to take all this, stamp it out, create enough sub-elements in it for the given arguments. So it's, again, it's pretty much ng repeat, little differences under the hood, but still works the same. And then we have our pound item of items. Now that's kind of different, but it's really not. We have the item in items where we had it automatically assumed that that item was something that we're going to use throughout our ng repeat. Well, one of the things that Angular 2 wants to be better about is being more explicit about where things are coming from and how things are going to be happening inside of Angular land. So here we're just creating this thing called a local variable reference where we have this reference to an item, no matter what it is. In this case, it's going to be an object, or actually in our case, it's going to be a number. But we have that reference to it, and that's how we can set up our data bindings. Now, this can be mundane as just grabbing something from an ng repeat or an ng4, or we can add a variable to a full element, create a method to call that element when we pass it in. And then our button, our ng click is gone for good reasons too. Anytime that there was ever an event that needed to happen inside of Angular's digest, we needed to create a directive to let Angular know that this event happened, this expression was evaluated, update the digest loop. Well, with this new parentheses syntax, we can now just stick any event we want in there, and it'll just work. So say you had a foobar event. Anytime foobar was emitted, if we place that inside of the click, so we say anytime foobar is emitted, add would get called. So inside my console, I could just emit foobar, and everything would just work. So quick kind of idea of how you can think about the transition is controllers are classes. This is good. Classes are definitely a step in the right direction. We have directives. All of our templates and our directives, they essentially just become components. Everyone's kind of going for this componentized model. You know, React's really heavy on components. Polymer is basically all components. Jump aboard the component train. And then we can get rid of Angular.module because Angular.module is a rough hack. We can actually use some of the common module systems out there. ES6 module, CommonJS, system imports. We can use all of these other module systems that are out there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel for one framework. Now, I should have asked this before. How many of you have ever built an Ionic app? Okay. For those who never built an Ionic app, I'm just going to pick someone at random. You in the blue coat. Why didn't you build an Ionic app? Have you heard about Ionic before? Never heard of it. Okay. So, that didn't work out as planned. But for those who have built Ionic apps before, how's this going to affect it, and how much rewrite are you going to have to do if you have an Ionic app already out there? So we've been working really hard on our Ionic 2 version that is built from the ground up using Angular 2. We actually have weekly meetings with the Angular team, so that way we stay in sync with them. We're actually, anytime we have questions, we kind of have an unfair access to the creators of all this code. So we can just say, hey, this app component thing, what is it? Well, we kind of can ask them. But we can take all this information and feed it back into the community and create something that mobile developers who are used to using Ionic 1 can have an easier time with. So obvious places we want to improve upon with this. We want to make the framework just dead simpler. Angular 1 itself was kind of complicated, and it didn't help that we had all of our own specific APIs. So we want to make this a little bit simpler in terms of JavaScript, also our HTML and our markup. Platform continuity, how can we really blur that native UX and UI so that way we don't land in this weird uncanny valley of just, I don't know what this is, but it feels wrong. Performance is an obvious one. If you never want to improve upon performance, just stop. Creative freedom, how can we make it so that way, no matter what it is, if you want to customize it, you can. And we really want to push this. You write once in web technology, and it will run anywhere. So, first example is of how we improved our markup. If you think about it, markup is bread and butter of Angular. You spend a lot of time just looking at markup, writing your directives inline on that template, and working with that. But the unfortunate side effect is you have to use some kind of styles. And this is kind of where the problem that Ionic 1 had. It was one part CSS framework and one part JavaScript framework. With this, since we went all in on Angular 2, we had a chance to go back and say, all right, no matter what, we're going to have these elements. So if for some reason we switched to, or created some other bindings or another framework, at least this markup will still look the same. So in here, we have an ion item. This is a pure CSS-driven element. There's no directive or JavaScript behind it. And then we have this ion avatar element. If I'm just going to call back from reference, I think an avatar element is just a picture of something. It just sits in a list. I see this item left property on it. Well, this avatar item's inside of a ion item. So maybe that has something to do with it. I can just assume that this image is going to sit on the left side of the item, maybe. And then inside of that, next to that, I have just a user, a p tag with a user1 in it. So I can start to figure out what this element's going to look like before I even open up a browser. I can start understanding my markup better just by looking at it. Much more thought out example is, how does this relate to all of views and state definitions and template controllers? Well, I already said with Angular 2, we got rid of controllers and templates and just created components. Well, in this case, we can go back and push that further and just say, well, now instead of having a view, we have a page. And we can start to think of this as like a view controller inside of iOS, where the visuals and the logic portion of it are just together. So in here, we just have our at page, and this page has a template where we're creating a nav bar. So now instead of having a single global nav bar, we have a nav bar, an embedded nav bar template inside of our page. On here, we have just an ion content, and I'm just pulling out my name. And the class automatically gets attached to this at page, and everything will render out. This is much simpler than think about, okay, now I have to go through the fun process of $state provider, .state, This is my view, and just feels simpler, and everything just feels closer together where they should be. So I have a nasty habit of asking people for APIs when I probably shouldn't, or they probably shouldn't give it to me. And I grab APIs and I just build stuff. So I built an app using Ionic 2 for Philly ETE. So I'm just going to run serve, and I'm going to run it in Ionic Serve Lab. You know, it's just going to start building everything, compiling all the TypeScript in this case, and Sass, compiling this all down. We can ignore that error for now. That's on me. And boom. Now I have my app running inside the browser, and I just have Android. I'm just mocking the platforms for each of these. So in here, I just have a simple list of all the events that are going on. So, ooh, this one actually looks pretty interesting. So this is the node module diaries. This is tomorrow at 1:30. This is actually coming through as a markdown. So I can now render this all out using some third-party libraries. Have that all work. With the Android version, I get that nice material design look and feel. Excuse the latency. I could have been a better developer and cached those images, but lazy web dev. Yeah, you know, start checking out some of the speakers. If I want to feed my narcissism, I can check out my own stuff. But yeah, that works fine. That's a browser. What's the code behind it look like? Try not to break my computer. I'm going to use code for this. Code out of the box works really well with TypeScript. Some people may still feel weird for using a Microsoft product. It doesn't bother me. I'm already using a language they wrote. I'm just going to close all that. So out of the box, you get this pretty simple structure where we have a collection of pages, and these just become essentially our components. We have these things called pipes now, which instead of being filters in Angular 1, where you could have a filter that's also a filter, we now have a pipe that can be anything. We have our providers, where essentially these are our services and factories. We have our theme, so if I wanted to style this a little bit more, and yes, you are seeing that right, that is app.wp for Windows platform. So this does work inside of Windows 10. And then we have our main file, where all of this is getting started. So in here, we have the first big difference. We have a bunch of import statements for various things. So with Angular 2, we're really pushing this. Everything is imported. We're being explicit about where everything's coming from. We're not relying on the global scope, which is all good. So in here, we're just importing our app and our platform. And if I wanted to see what else I could import, I can see all the available options because this is TypeScript. So this editor knows about all of the things that Ionic exports. I have this tabs page where that's actually coming down here. We can see the reference highlighting. But essentially, we have this nav component, which has a dynamic property of root. So anytime you want to make a property dynamic of inner HTML, hidden, value, placeholder, we can place it inside of these square braces or square brackets. And Angular will know that this is going to change over time, and the actual value right here is going to be declared later on in my class. So we have this root component. We're setting its value to root page. Root page is actually just going to load this tabs page. So if we follow everything down and go down the rabbit hole, we'll look at tabs and tabs.ts. It's pretty similar in our tabs file. We're importing a bunch of different things, a bunch of different pages, and we're essentially setting all the default routes. So if I wanted the default route for the first tab to be the speakers page, when I go back to my browser, it'll reload, and the default route will be the speakers. Go back, save. Not a whole lot of functionality going on here. This is really just a loader page. And we'll check out the schedule page because that's probably the most interesting one. In here, we have our template. We have a nav bar in here, which is part of a global nav bar that gets embedded. So essentially, we have this thing called content projection, where essentially we can use transclude, but not use transclude. This is now actually part of the web component spec, where we can have the contents of this template be rendered into this, or the contents of this custom element get rendered into a template. So in here, we're saying that this navbar is going to point back to a reference of a global navbar, and when that global navbar sees this, it's going to pull everything out and just load it all up. So in here, we have the title. We have this property for the color of the navbar. So if I wanted to change this to a different color, now it's automatically red. But when I go to a different page, it automatically knows, all right, well, this isn't that color anymore. Let's update it and animate the color. We have this toolbar. It has a built-in component for a search bar. So when we focus on this, we can start searching. I don't know why Ionic isn't there. There it is. We can start searching for everything, get all that content to update. Don't mind the style right now. That's, again, on me. And we can cancel that out and clear all the search results and just have the animation for all that set up. All we really have to do is just set up the model that it's going to find, what the value of that's going to be. So we still have ng model. So we can just say that the value of this is going to be tied to a search query property on our class. And then down here in our ng4, after we iterate over everything, we can create a custom filter to reduce the results down to that special filter, or down to the search query. So down here, we just have that ng4 where we're repeating over all the objects inside of our array. We have filter, where, again, we're just going to filter down the results. And then we have an order by. I want to say that most of these are actually stuff that I built. So the filter and order by are just my own custom pipes that I've built. Angular 2 doesn't have many yet. I think they have some for date, and that's about it. But this allows me to just change the order of all of those objects by whatever I want. So if I wanted to change them by name, when I go back into my template, I can see that everything's all ordered alphabetically. If I go back and I change it by track, track, I can see I have this little indicator telling me which track these are all part of. So as I scroll, everything's nice and isolated. But I'm horrible with time, so I want to figure out when everything's starting. And then I'm using that different pipe later on, which is just calling moment.js and doing some time conversion from all those timestamps. So that pretty much is all of the template. Probably the cooler part is the actual logic behind it. So we have a bunch of stuff in here. Again, the obligatory imports. A lot of editors actually will automate most of this for you. So I know WebStorm and Visual Studio, they all do automatic imports. So as they analyze your code at startup, that's why it takes so long for most of them to start up. They just automatically analyze it. They'll build up, where is this coming from? So you can just use filter array pipe or order by pipe, moment pipe, and it'll just say, okay, this is relative paths. Here we go. We're good. So a lot of this can be automated by our tooling, so you don't have to worry about it too much. But essentially, we're just creating this page for this decorator, and then we have this nav controller, which is how we're going to start passing around all these talks. But first, we need to actually get some of these talks. So again, we have a nice separation of concerns. I have a separate class which is making all of my HTTP requests. I'm actually getting them locally from a JSON file because CORS is enabled on the server, so I can't actually can't load them without turning that off. But I have this .dataService.getData, and then I have this odd thing of .subscribe. So this is all part of observables. It's probably the only hard dependency that Angular depends on. And observables are kind of confusing at first, but we can think of them as like promises that can return multiple values over multiple times and can also be canceled. That's kind of their big thing, and especially in terms of HTTP requests. The fact that they can return multiple values over time makes things like WebSockets pretty trivial. But it just looks a little weird. But we can think of it as this .dataService.getData, and when that's ready, we'll say then, and we're going to be good developers, use arrow functions. We'll just take the results, filter that back, and then just say this schedule equals res.sessions. So this is the promise version of it. And then this is just a quick, simple, here's our service. Whenever we get that results back, if the actual API was sending results constantly, when I updated my bio or if I updated my name for some reason, I'd just get that update automatically. Some pretty interesting stuff. And I think it's pretty cool. So from there, we get that data back. We're setting our schedules. We're loading up everything. Now, how do we navigate around? So if you notice, actually, when we're inside of the individual platform, this URL never actually changes. So as we navigate around, again, URL is still the same. We're not actually using query params. We're actually just taking that raw object, passing it back and forth onto the component itself. So in this case, when we click on that actual item, we're going to grab that reference to this talk, pass that along into the get talk. Then from there, we're going to pass that along as we call our nav controller. We're going to use the push method in this case. So this is something that we actually borrowed from native development, where you have instead of a URL-driven development, we just have our navigation stack, and we can throw views on there as we want. We can pop views off. We can preload entire set of views, all with our own data. So like I say, this .nav get all the methods for that nav controller, which there are a lot. All fun stuff, but in this case, we're just going to push the session detail page, and then we're going to push another object along with that called session. And it's just going to have a value of that actual talk that we're passing along. So if we were to ever go into our session detail page and look at this, we can see that we have a property of session, and we're just going to call our parameters, our nav parameters, and we're just going to say, we know that there's something on there called session. Just give me the data from that, and we'll just load that all up. You can actually see this pretty well with so we'll load all of that. And then down here, we have our nav params. The snap params has a property of data, and on it, there's the full property for the entire session. So description, duration, all the fun stuff. All these random numbers to describe things. And that start and that time notation. But instead of using query to params like dollar state params, we can just use our full navigation params and just pass in actual full object literals, not like object.json.stringify to pass that along in the URL bar. Who needs that? So this is pretty interesting because now it's just a much more fluid development experience. If we were to look at the actual thing that's loading all this data, it's a pretty minimal example. This is just my data.ts. This is where I'm just loading all of my data. I have a single method that does something called getData. If this was a real app where I can access it not from localhost, I would return that. Instead, I'm just going to return a JSON file, just in case something with any kind of request. We want to make sure that we're actually returning JSON. So this will strip this out and just parse it as JSON. And if there's anything that happens, we can actually handle this our own. So we can say catch and throw a proper observable error. So if I were to say call dat.json, load this up, whoa. Okay, well we have a little bit of a better response in this case. So the last part I want to talk about are some of these pipes. Because this is all using not Angular, but this is all using third-party libraries to format things. I think it was important to show that because we're not limited to just what Angular offers. We can, if we don't want to use that, if we didn't want to use the observable HTTP module, we could pull in our own library and just have that work. It really allows you to create your own kind of flow. Like if for some reason your team favors something else, Axios is another popular library for this, so I could do that. Again, I see down here I have this moment filter or moment pipe where I'm just taking the start time, formatting it by whatever I want. I have a markdown filter over here that just takes all of this and unfortunately has to set inner HTML. Can't actually bind to raw markup. So you actually have to set the inner HTML. Not a fan of it. We can set dynamic properties with class, and then just I'll send that to another pipe. This one actually is built into Angular called lowercase, just text transform. If we actually look at those pipes, we have our markdown pipe, which is just using the marked library. We have our order by pipe. I'm just using Lodash for this. We have our filter pipe, which, yeah, it's doing a few things. I probably could have used Lodash for this, but it just felt cool to actually show this off and write it. And then I have a moment pipe where I'm just taking the value that I'm passing in and formatting it by the arguments I pass along with it. So this is a much better syntax than Angular 1's .filter. And probably the coolest part is that because this is TypeScript moment, I actually get all the type definitions for moment.js, so I can pull in any raw JavaScript library and have that code completion that a lot of people like. So I can check to see if it's valid. Is moment.isMoment, who knows? So that's fun and cool, but we're actually building native apps, and we want native capabilities. So in this session detail, I had this share method over here. Now this share method is actually calling out to another project we have called Ionic Native, which is just TypeScript bindings for all the Cordova plugins. So in this case, I'm setting up a message variable that I'm going to use later, and then I'm going to call the camera, and I think this is probably the coolest part, camera.getPicture, and the camera API for the plugin has like a bazillion different options. Most of them are all in here, and what media type are they? Popover options, do I want to turn on flash, the quality, all that is all provided by the library. And then once that's done, I can take the image and call the social sharing plugin. So I'm going to kill the server, say Ionic run Android, and I'm going to send it to my device. Build everything, minify it all. Demo gods, don't fail me now. There we go. It's going to go out, talk to Java. It's going to actually compile the native APK for this, install it on my lovely Nexus 5 over here. My lovely artistic skills on display. I made that myself. I'm kind of proud of it. Now we have the animations. I will say it's a little laggy on the screen because it's over USB, but if we think about it over here, I'm going to try my best. We have the animations. The page loading up. We have some nice smooth. We have some nice smooth scrolling. Yeah. Again, I'm going to go to the Ionic talk. I have this share button. I'm going to open up my camera. Yeah, it looks fine in my phone. So if you guys give me like a nice excited look. Sweet. There we go. Why, yes. Yes, I do want Twitter to access my phone. I now have everything all set up. I'm just going to tweet that. We'll just go to Twitter. I'm Hartington. Maybe it takes a little while with the internet. We'll reload a couple times. There we go. And now it's all just posted up on Twitter. All that written with JavaScript, all of that in less than an hour. Yeah, that app actually took less than an hour to code for all the data requests, all the styling, the actual native integration. It was all there, all the editor. The editor basically held my hand the entire time, so that's fun. So, that's my example of a real app. And you guys can actually clone it. It's up on GitHub. Take a look at it, play with it. So if you've used Ionic 1 before, everything from Ionic 1 is still there in the framework. It's just been rebuilt from the ground up to be much more powerful, built to take advantage of all of these new language features that we have, such as ES6, TypeScript, and built to work with Angular 2. So if you want to try it out, and I really hope that you do, and give us good feedback, it is in beta right now. So if you go to ionic.io/2, you can get brought to our 2.0 docs, a lot of which I wrote, so if there's anything wrong, you know who to yell at. I really want you guys to try it out. There's a lot of links. All the links will be in the slides for this presentation. our documentation, our forum, our public Slack channel. We're starting to get to a point where React Native did, and we're up to 5,000 people in there. So if you want to come hang out, talk with me a little bit, I hang out there basically every day until Slack decides to kick us off. But more importantly, you can find us all up on GitHub, driftyco/Ionic, and it's in the v2 branch right now. So with that, if you have any questions, that's the URL for everything. So definitely take a look on there. Give me a few seconds to actually push all the changes up. But if you have any questions, I'd love to take them now. Yeah?
Can you hold on 1 second? We're recording. How do you unit test?
So unit test, because it's all just JavaScript at this point, you don't need to worry about like protractor or any Angular specific bindings for a framework. At the moment, there's no good solid story for Angular 2 testing because everything kind of is still in flux a bit, but you can expect to just use whatever vanilla JavaScript testing framework you used before. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
What happens if Angular 2 goes away?
What's that?
I said, what happens if Angular 2 goes away and doesn't actually launch?
What happens if Angular 2 goes away? Well, then Google will be very upset because they also have a large number of apps internally that depend on Angular 2 and that are already running on it. So if they don't actually ship something in a timely manner, we have HR. It's kind of funny when you think about it, but Google has invested a lot of time in Angular because they depend on it. We can think that as long as Google is interested in it, it'll be there. If it did go away, I don't think it would be the end of the world because we still are just writing JavaScript for the most part. We have all of those ES6 classes, all TypeScript. We don't really have to worry about, well, what if Angular somehow decides to disappear overnight? Doesn't matter, we still have JavaScript. But we don't have to worry about it disappearing because Google has a lot of investment in on it. Cool. Any other questions? No? Okay, so thank you. You guys have been awesome.